As I mentioned to you this morning, we will plan to draw your attention to Psalm 91 this evening. Psalm 91, and again, probably one of my favorite psalms. There's several of them, maybe. Psalm 27, I believe, is another key one for me, and maybe some others too. But anyway, Psalm 91, just such a good message here, and I'm going to go ahead and read the whole psalm. Psalm 91. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust. Surely He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid of the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold and see the reward of the wicked. Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. There shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. For He shall give His angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and adder, the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. Because, now this is God speaking in this case, because He hath set His love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him, and show him my salvation. Concluding there with verse number 16. That's kind of an interaction there. David making his great profession that he is going to trust in the Lord. God's going to come through for him. And then God responding in the last few verses there as well. And so this evening I'd like to deal with this issue of protection from the enemy. Protection from the enemy. Read how there was a construction crew that was building a new road. It was going through a rural area, kind of the countryside or whatever, and there were trees all around, and they were knocking down those trees in order to build the new road through that area. But one particular tree had a nest of birds that couldn't yet fly. And so the superintendent, having sort of a soft heart, he marked it temporarily. We'll save that one until the birds can fly free. And several weeks later, they came back. The superintendent got into a bucket truck there and was hoisted up or lifted up there to be able to look into the nest. And he checked it. It was now empty. And so the tree was cut. And as it fell, it dislodged that nest, and the nest flung free there, and as it did, it broke apart, and it revealed a scrap of paper in the nest. It was a bit of a Sunday school pamphlet, and it had this little saying on there, "He careth for you." Now, I think that's a cute story, because the very thought that God cared enough to allow them to leave the nest until the babies were big enough to get out on their own, and then having that little Sunday school pamphlet, little snippet there in that nest. Now we may like to think that we're strong. We'd like to think that we have life all kind of put together. We aren't bothered by the storms. We don't struggle. Spiritually, we're maybe a giant, or if not a giant, at least we're doing okay. But there are times when the enemy comes against us with such treachery and hounds us so mercilessly that we must have the special presence of God to bring us through triumphantly. And I don't even necessarily like to hear someone profess or act like I'm never bothered by the storm, because I just sort of wonder a little bit about that. I think that all of us face those trying times. We can notice in verse number 3 here the the two kinds of attack here. One is the snare of the fowler, and in my mind, of course, the fowl referred to there being the birds. So the one who's trying to catch birds, he may set a snare, some sort of a net for the birds, and no noise, no indication that it's there. It's just a danger. Then he mentions the noisome pestilence, and though we may think of that as noisy, actually it's referring probably more so to this issue of a grievous pestilence that may even take lives. Possibly it could be referring to a storm. But even later on here, we do see the storm. The verse number 6, it mentions again the pestilence that would walk in darkness and may catch us unaware. But then also the destruction that wasteth at noonday, and that very likely referring to a little bit more dramatic storm that we might face. So you have several here: the silent snare, maybe the silent sickness, also the destroying storm, and just different types of dangers that are mentioned here. And the devil will use anything he can do to hound us and to beat us into submission or to catch us unaware. And we may feel sometimes almost overwhelmed by the danger, but we need, in those times especially, we need the special presence of God. Now, I've mentioned this numbers of times. I'm not prepared to tell you how long you must spend in the secret place, but it does tell us here in verse number 1, it's referring to those who dwell in the secret place of the Most High. Those who spend their time there. Those who aren't just a quick visitor there and then leave. But it is those who dwell there. And I think we need to take that to heart and recognize that we need to be spending time in the presence of God. Now, under the law, the Old Testament law, then nobody but the priest was supposed to go in there before the Lord. They were not allowed in there. But of course, in the new covenant with Jesus, and we're under the New Testament now, and so we can come boldly before the throne of grace. We can make our petitions. We can find grace to help in time of need. And when we do enter His presence, when we do come before Him, maybe it's at your bedside, maybe it's out in the living room, maybe it's in, for that matter, maybe it could be in your car if you have a commute or something. But I think we all need a place where we can get quiet before God and uninterrupted. That's one danger with driving, is that it may be interrupted and you're distracted by everything else. But whatever it may be, when we face that or when we go through those times of storm and difficulty, we better be prayed up. We better be spending time in the secret place with God. And God takes care of those. In fact, as you go back down here to the latter verses where it says, because He hath set His love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. Verse number 14. And so God comes through for those who spend time with Him. And we can enjoy His various blessings there as we do. And so let's take a few moments to notice several aspects to this psalm. First of all, let me just touch on this pavilion. I know I've already kind of maybe alluded to this or dealt with it a little bit, but I just want to talk about that pavilion. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Really, one of the best defenses that we have against the enemy is that sanctuary with God. The time that we can spend carefully focused on Him and making our petitions and asking Him to search our hearts and really drawing close to Him. I find that the more careless I am, the more brief my time is with God. Maybe I spend a little time, but it's not really in depth like it ought to be. It's not an extended time. Maybe I'm not dwelling there like I ought to, but it's again one of those brief visits in and out of the place of prayer. But when I find that it's more difficult to spend time with Him, or when my busy schedule has hindered that is when I am most susceptible. Maybe not always to outward sin, but that the devil plays games with my mind and causes trouble that I just need that extra time in God's presence. Now that's not necessarily in church, although that's a part of it. I'm glad that we can come together, we can worship like this, but it has to be even beyond that, where in my daily time with God, I have an altar in my own heart and I spend time in His presence. I'm dwelling in the secret place of the Most High. We're given strength. And largely, I believe it's based on the level of communion we have with God. How much we've spent time with Him. If we spend little time, we can expect little strength. That pavilion is so critical. And if I could just urge you, make sure you don't sacrifice that. I know I have to preach that to myself, but we must be spending time in His presence. And I know that place of refuge is often one of struggle because the devil knows how important it is. Actually, I mentioned earlier Psalm 27. Let me just go back there for a few moments. I think there's a key verse we could take from that as well. And that's verse number 5. He says, "For in the time of trouble shall He hide me in His pavilion. In the secret of His tabernacle shall He hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock." And really, if we're going to try to mind God, if we're going to try to resist the devil, we must be in God's pavilion, in His presence, the sacred place of refuge. And we must guard it at all costs. It's disturbing sometimes how many people kind of have the idea that, I want God's privilege, the privileges of knowing God. I want the privileges that are maybe associated with His pavilion, which we've read them to you even here this evening. And we can look at all these things. He's going to cover me, and I can trust in Him. He'll give me the angels to help me. All those things. They like those privileges, but they don't particularly get enthused about dwelling in God's pavilion. They don't want to be there all the time. They just want to run in for a little blessing and then go back out about their daily tasks. That's not really what this is about. We must be dwelling there. We must be spending time there. These privileges aren't for those who are just infrequent visitors to His feet, so to speak, and to His pavilion, come before Him and make promises or whatever else for a few moments so that we can somehow get those privileges for ourselves. That's not it at all. The pavilion must be something that we spend time at. We really, when we don't have the time for a close relationship, when we don't make it a priority in our lives, when things are going well, then we really have sort of sabotaged the work of God even when times are stormy and when we're facing the difficulty. And so don't neglect that time, even in the good days, on the times where God has blessed you. But this promise is for those who dwell there. And we really need to take it to heart. The second one we notice is also in several verses here, verses 2 through 4, also down to 11 and 12. We can see the issue of His protection. His protection. And I suppose probably the natural thought in our minds, and in fact, I even kind of gave you this idea a little bit earlier, but that idea comes through of the chick that covers her brood with her feathers, and even if a fire comes or whatever, there's some of the stories that have gone around and kind of maybe feel good stories, or at least touching stories, moving stories, that you think about that hen that just won't move. She protects her chicks. And yet, really, if we take this literally, probably there could be a predator that would come along, and the mother's staying there, and she's protecting that brood, and the predator, whoever it may be, they kill the hen and tussle around with her, and then the chicks are exposed, and it gets them too. We understand that could happen. But when we come to God for His protection, when we are looking at Him as our refuge and fortress, when it says that He will cover us or deliver us. And verse 4, He'll cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. When we read things like that, or even down to these later verses, how the angels can help us and will take care of us. When we have that, we know that God is completely reliable. And when we're really resting in Him, the enemy cannot get the upper hand. God will come through no matter what. And He's certain to protect us when we really are dwelling in Him, when we're really trying our best to please Him. He will always come through. Now, I don't know about all the truth of the guardian angel idea and everything. Obviously, it says that He'll give His angels charge concerning us. He's going to give them the instructions. They need to be taking care of us. All those things. I don't know. Some people have the idea angels are riding on the bumper of the car and all those things. I don't know about all that. But it is apparent that at least God does send his angels in times of need. When we are needing someone to work on our behalf, he does give his angels that charge to keep us and to bear us up in their hands and to help us in those times of need. Psalm 34, verse 7, another key one really for me as well. I mentioned 27 and 91, but 34 is another good one. Let me just go back there for a few moments and look at one verse there in verse 7 of Psalm 34. The angel of the Lord encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. And so again, you have that whole idea. Again, I don't know all those details. I'm not ready. I don't think the Bible tells us enough about exactly how that works. If we each have our own guardian angel and all that. But I am here to tell you that they're an indication of God's care for his people, that he will send them in a moment's notice. Obviously, God's not taken by surprise, so it's not a moment's notice for him. But as we would think of it, a moment's notice to fight the enemy and to push back the storms and to give us the victory that we need. One that I've thought of various times. It may even maybe be a little different course here, but when Daniel was praying about a certain need that was so desperate, and God sent Michael the archangel, one of the best of the best, and he sent him to bring the word, and Daniel was wondering why it took 3 weeks for the message to get through, and Michael said, I had to fight to get this answer through to you, but I'm here. And sometimes we think of Michael as particularly the head of the should we say, the warriors of God. And Gabriel may be more of the messenger. But anyway, there is, when we are taken care of by God, when we have his protection, there is nothing that's too big for us. There's no enemy too severe. There's no battle too hard. There's no storm too violent that we can't make it through. God offers his protection to his children. Now, just to clarify, that may not always be a total deliverance from our problem. That's not always to say that God is just going to remove every storm, heal every sickness, just squelch every temptation. But it is there to say, I will be with you and you can overcome. God has his protection for us in every trying circumstance. There will be grace and power to face every trying hour. That's a familiar course to some, but we like that message. There will be grace and power for every trying hour. Praise God. His protection. So we dwell in his pavilion, and then we have his protection, but there's a sort of a third aspect that it's kind of been hovering over all the rest of it anyway, but that is that we also have his peace. And maybe I would say his presence, in particular, bringing peace. His presence is what hovers over that whole truth, but he brings us peace. And again, we can look at that, several ideas here in the last few verses 14 through 16. And again, these are the words of God responding to the psalmist here. And he says, because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. Doesn't even use the word peace, but that's all through that idea. I will be there. I will step in. I will make the difference in your situation. And then you can go back also to the very beginning of the psalm. And though we focused on the last few verses, could I just remind you that, again, how can we know God's peace? By dwelling in the secret place of the Most High. That's when we find that God steps in and gives us peace in our storm. Now, just a quick little, it's sort of a nature lesson or whatever. I mean, you know this well, I suppose. But you think about it. Are you usually very far from your shadow? No. Obviously, if the sun's way down, then your shadow might be pretty long. But your shadow is pretty close to you because it starts right where you end. And, however far the sun may be, it kind of maybe throws a longer shadow, but it always starts with you. And so in some measure, I don't know if that's all that's involved here, But when he says that he shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty, if we're in his shadow, we are going to be pretty close to him. And we find peace when we're dwelling close to God. Maybe I'll just touch on a couple of aspects here. One that I like to think of, and we kind of have this coming through, it mentions verse 4, he'll cover thee, in this case it's with his feathers. Again, kind of the idea of the chick, or the hen with the chicks. But we recognize that he will cover us by his hand. It's an old-time preacher years ago, and my parents told me about. I don't even know that I ever heard him in person, but I think my parents had heard him. August Lelf was his name. He stuttered real bad until he got in the pulpit and began to preach, and God would touch him. But he may still stutter a little bit, but he was very, very plain and apparently quite a good preacher. I think I've heard a recording of him maybe. But anyway, he used to say about how he'd be, God kept him in his hand, and every once in a while he'd kind of take a peek at him and make sure everything was okay. Well, obviously God doesn't have to take a peek. He knows all about that, but we are covered by his hand. And when we are, we can be at peace. No matter how much the storm may rage, when he's covering us, we have sufficient strength and help. And then really we ought to recognize too that we can be content in his hand. I know sometimes we wonder. We don't always see what's going on. And maybe I shouldn't go this far in the analogy, but when we're covered, sometimes it might be pretty dark in there. But even when it seems dark, even when we don't see exactly what God's doing, we know we're in his hand, and we know that he cares for us, and we can be content. Really, if you think about it, what better place is there than to be in God's hand? To just know that he's taking care of me. I have all that I need, and he is sufficient to provide. He gives me peace because I am with him in the storm. When you think about even the disciples as they were in the boat there in the midst of the storm, and Jesus is in the bottom of the boat, and they were very much not at peace. But when Jesus got up and got out there, the one time in particular, he was sleeping in the bottom of the boat, and he comes up there and he calms the storm in just a little bit, brings peace. And some of the words that he used even was peace, be still. And sometimes, as the song has said it, sometimes he calms the storm, sometimes he calms me. But either way, he brings peace. Praise his name. Well, I'm sure that we all have times when we can't really seem to make it any farther. We don't know just how we can continue to resist the devil or how we can get through the storm, especially those very difficult circumstances. We may not really know just exactly what it's going to take to get through. Seems like maybe we can't stand any more pressure, and we can't make it through the battle, the next battle that's coming. But in those times, we need to remember to be dwelling in the secret place. And I suppose I'd have to say that that's kind of where I'm sort of preaching what God has maybe dealt with me about or spoken to me about. When I feel like I'm so weak and so helpless and I don't know what to do, and even just recently feeling a little bit that way, I know I need a little more time dwelling in the secret place of the Most High. That's where we find our strength. That's how we prevail. That's how we enjoy God's protection. And that's how we experience God's peace. Dwell in the secret place. Know the peace found in God's pavilion. So if you're facing the storm this evening, run to the Savior. Spend time in his presence. Take a little extra time. Don't minimize those times in the secret place of the Most High, but instead spend time dwelling in his presence, asking him for direction, asking him for strength, hearing from heaven, and receiving the help and strength that we need to get through. Praise his name.